Thank you. Senator Ludlam.
Thanks, Mr Acting Deputy President. The Greens will be opposing this bill, and I'll briefly spell out why. Before I do, I want to ask the government to clarify one simple issue, and I hope Senator Fifield or any of the other coalitions who file in here this afternoon to explain themselves on this bill to just be a bit clear about where this is all going. And the question is this: when will you actually be happy? Will you be happy if this bill is passed and SBS starts broadcasting the same amount of advertising during prime time as commercial TV stations? Is that what this is about? Will you be happy when SBS is allowed to have as much product placement in its programs as an episode of, say, MasterChef or The Block? Is that what this is about? Will you be happy if the creeping commercialisation of SBS spreads to the ABC and we start seeing advertising breaks on the 7:30 report? Is that where this is going? Will you be happy if SBS is eventually rolled into the ABC under the cover of meeting more of your efficiency targets? Will you be happy if both get privatised or broken up to create a fourth commercial free-to-air TV network? Is that what this is about? Because what we want to know in the course of the debate that's going to be undertaken this afternoon is where is this all going and where will it end? And I ask this because all indications are that this legislation is just one step along a path which Prime Minister Abbott and Minister Turnbull cooked up, presumably before the election. Prime Minister wanted a bit-off message in guaranteeing that this wouldn't happen, but nonetheless that hasn't stopped them to deal with what they see as the problem of Australia's public broadcasters. And they probably had a bit of help from the Institute of Public Affairs, because they've openly called for the ABC to be broken up and put out for tender, and for SBS simply to be privatised. Just get rid of it. And Mr Murdoch, who wants public broadcasting done away with entirely in Australia because he doesn't like the idea of a taxpayer-funded competitor. That's fine. That's his business interests. He's pretty good at prosecuting those. So step one in this genius plan was to assure the Australian public that there'd be no cuts to ABC or SBS on the eve of the federal election. Senator Conroy has canvassed that at reasonable length. You look people in the eye, you tell them there'll be no cuts, and then right after the election you cut their budget. Actually, people loathe being lied to. They loathe it. People remember. You might think that people forget, but no, it's all being stored up. People remember what you said and then what you did. Step two, implement the cuts anyway under the cover of an efficiency dividend and smash up the Australia network. So that's gone now. Step three is to significantly enhance the amount of advertising on SBS and formally allow the kind of really objectionable and intrusive in-program advertising which has already driven Australia's other free-to-air TV programs towards endless reality TV dramas in order to sell, more cans of whatever is on special at Woolworths and Coles this week, and more of everything at Bunnings. The kind of fusion, the merging, the diffusion between content and advertising that's so far advanced on the commercial TV stations. And no one except the IPA says it out loud, but it's pretty clear what the next steps after those three are going to be. Roll SBS, its back office structures, its advertising rules into the ABC, and then flog both off to the highest bidder. I dare any one of you to come out and just let us know that that's where this is heading. It's pretty obvious that that's what some of you want. It's just that you don't have the courage to front up and say so. And the staggering thing is that actually, we finally hit a bit of a nerve. It's all right, you'll get your opportunity, Senator Sullivan.
Ludlam, pass your remarks through the chair, please.
Through the chair. Senator Sullivan will get the opportunity. He's not on the speaking list. He's happy to sit on the back row sniping, as he does so well. Happy to hear your actual views through you, Mr Chair. And the extraordinary thing is that nobody, apart from these ideologues, actually want this to happen. There are no interest groups out there demanding SBS carry more advertising. Nobody's marching in the streets demanding that the public broadcasters be privatised. Nobody wants what is occurring here, the creeping commercialisation of a really treasured public institution. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We've got a petition with 62,000 signatures on it, opposing more advertising on SBS. 62,000 people. I dare you to find 5 people who think it's a good idea to increase primetime advertising on SBS. We've got all of Australia's major free-to-air broadcasters, 7, 9 and 10, all opposing the changes. They might seem like slightly unlikely allies, but I think they have a really valid point. The commercial broadcasters are struggling, as it is, with declining ad revenues and declining forecasts for the kind of ad revenues that they rely on solely, ad revenues and in-program advertising, sponsorship agreements, various other commercial arrangements. The last thing they want is a fourth commercial competitor, juiced up with taxpayers' dollars, bidding into a pool that is the same size of advertising content on prime time. So I think they do have a point. We've got poll after poll showing that Australians regard SBS and the ABC as two of the nation's most trusted institutions. Australians trust the ABC and SBS a damn sight more than they trust your government. And that's just a fact. That's not a Greens opinion. That's just weight of numbers. Sorry, colleagues, but it's true. And the truth is that the government is pursuing this course to satisfy the demands of a rather extreme ideology. Let's get that to the end. But the tactics are that of blackmail. It's nothing more complicated than that. It's as cheap as hell. Blackmail. Pass our broadcasting bill or SBS gets it. We're just going to cut the budget unless you allow us to increase the amount of advertising that they run in prime time. And I actually respond really poorly to blackmail. I think there's only one way to deal with people of that character, and that is to refuse to play the game. We will be opposing the bill. It's bad legislation, and it'll deliver poor outcomes for SBS. The audience hates it. Negative outcomes to the rest of the TV industry because you're bidding into an advertising pool that's not growing. In fact, there are arguments that it's shrinking. And as senators, I think we should listen to the basic common sense and the commercial reality that the broadcast environment has got to at the moment and send the bill back to the drawing board. There's been a lot of debate about how much money the legislation will allow SBS to raise, and in fact the estimates diverge wildly. The bill's regulatory impact statement estimated $8 to $9 million a year. This is not a total of more advertising running on SBS, and let's be really clear about that. It allows SBS to run effectively double the amount of advertising on prime time, plus 4 minutes of their own sponsorship materials and their own promo material. So it's basically 14 minutes an hour in prime time of non-content. $8 to $9 million said that regulatory impact statement there is. The Lewis review into ABC and SBS, when they were investigating efficiencies, as you chose to call it, put estimates a lot higher. They said $20 million on the table. The industry group Free TV estimated a lot higher, around $148 million a year. We don't know where SBS's figures come from because they have been deemed commercial in confidence, which is really not that helpful when you're trying to form a view. Now, any of these outcomes, all of these outcomes, are negative both for the viewers of SBS, the station itself, and the broadcasting industry more generally. Because if the government's estimates are correct, then the bill substantially increases advertising on SBS and degrades people's viewing experience for a mere $8 million a year, which the government could afford to pay. If we held the Prime Minister at his word, and we've all learnt through bitter experience that you can't do that, then this wouldn't be happening at all, certainly not for $8 million a year. And if the higher estimates are correct, then I guess we should pay more attention to the views of the free-to-air industry and the commercial broadcasters, because that is basically ripping ad revenues out of the pool of the commercial broadcasters who have local content obligations that SBS doesn't have. And we should maybe take their arguments more seriously. That effectively there's simply no room in a market the size of Australia for a fourth commercial network. And the iceberg that's hidden under the water, as a number of commentators have pointed out, is allowing SBS formally to pursue more product placement in its programs is likely to influence its programming choices towards content that's more likely to make it more money, putting in place a really direct conflict with the Charter. You know, chasing the MasterChef stuff or The Block, where effectively it's just really long-form advertising. May be very entertaining, does nothing for me, but it's out there, people love it. But it's really long-form advertising. That's what it is. And it's really easy for SBS to say that it wouldn't happen. They've been protesting. We've had a number of Senate committee inquiries that have participated in where SBS, you know, effectively with a gun to its head in the background, so I'm not really blaming SBS management. They've been put in this position by the executive, by this government, who said, we won't cut your budget, now we're cutting your budget. And they've sent SBS forward to argue. We haven't been able to get to the bottom, actually, of whose idea this was. That was one of the disappointments of the committee process, that it hasn't been possible to pinpoint whose brilliant idea this was in the first place. And anyone who has spent any time in large media organisations will know that the sales and editorial departments continually clash over issues of independence, and that sales has a history of winning. Not within SBS necessarily up to the present time, because their charter obligations are so strong and the audiences demand it, but that is what this government is sabotaging with a bill of this kind. And the other iceberg, I guess, that we should be mindful of is the proposition or the possibility or the likelihood of further cuts. Because as SBS's advertising restrictions are lightened and it makes more money, there'll be nothing at all to stop a future government from using that situation as an argument to lighten its restrictions further. This is scope creep. It's a step along the way. We know this isn't the last time that this issue will be visited. The Communications Minister of the day will be back in this place arguing against further measures or for further measures that will push SBS further towards full commercialisation. And that long-run trend has been evident for many years. It's a slippery slope. The first step down that slope was taken 25 years ago when SBS was first opened up to advertising to seek sponsorship to help it broadcast the World Cup. And it's been sliding faster and faster ever since. And governments, I guess both sides are somewhat guilty of this, but this government, I think, has elevated it to something of an art form. You are responsible, when you come into government, for the maintenance and the protection of these public institutions. The most fundamental principles that we should hold up when debating measures like this is not to try and fix something that isn't broken. SBS is not broken. It is a treasured institution and it does a wonderful job of broadcasting content that reflects Australia's multicultural society. So stop messing with the formula. And so here is some advice to those Liberal and National MPs on that side of the chamber with your instinctive loathing of all things public, whether it's public housing, public health, public education, public transport or public broadcasting. The Coalition are so desperate to hollow out these treasured public institutions and convert them into for-profit commercial operators. Then why don't you quit your well-paid public sector jobs and go work for the private sector? Knock yourselves out. Quit your public sector jobs and go work in the private sector. Maybe you're just not cut out for government. Maybe it's just not for you. We will be standing up for SBS and its charter obligations, and we will not submit to this shallow bit of blackmail. We oppose the bill.
Thank you, Senator Ludlam.